Hello, my name is Chris Hassler. I'm a civil rights specialist for Project Solutions, Inc. And today I'll be presenting on some of the considerations for DBEs once they are certified with South Dakota DOT and are participating in contracts for the state DOT. Today's presentation will be divided into two sections. One having to do with the actions that a DBE must take after certification to remain certified. And then also a second section on different DBE considerations, program considerations when you're working on South Dakota DOT construction projects. We'll begin the presentation with a look at the certification related topics. Once a DBE becomes certified, they take on a duty to inform the South Dakota DOT or any other state where they're certified about changes in their circumstances that affect the firm's ability to meet the size, disadvantaged status, ownership, or control requirements. DBE must inform South Dakota DOT in writing within 30 days of a change in circumstance that would affect one of these factors. Now, an obvious change in circumstance would be something like the owner of a DBE firm decides to retire and their children are going to take on ownership and management of the firm. But less obvious factors might speak to control. For example, if a DBE firm loses certain qualified or expert staff that help them carry out one or more of the work types that they're certified to perform, that is a change in circumstance that the South Dakota DOT DBE office needs to be informed about. Likewise, if a DBE suffers for some reason a loss of equipment that is essential in helping them carry out the duties that they're certified to perform in South Dakota, that would be a circumstance that the DBE office would need to know about. This also includes certification actions that have been taken by other states. If your DBE firm is certified in states other than South Dakota, or maybe if you're an out-of-state firm, if there is some certification action taken by another state regarding your DBE firm, that action is something that you have a duty to report to the South Dakota DBE office. Now, I'll add one more thing. It's not a regulatory duty to inform the DBE office of things like changes in your address or contact information, telephone number, email addresses, and so forth, but it sure is helpful. And as you'll see as we move forward through the presentation, there are instances where the South Dakota DBE office, South Dakota DOT DBE office will attempt to reach out to your firm. And if your contact information is up to date, it makes it quite a lot easier. If in a given 12-month period, there have been no changes in your DBE firm that would potentially affect your certification status, then once a year on the anniversary date of the certification of that firm in South Dakota, each DBE firm must provide to the South Dakota DOT what we call an annual affidavit. It swears or affirms that there have been no changes in the firm's, the DBE circumstances affecting its ability to meet size, disadvantaged status, ownership, or control requirements. The annual affidavit does require a specific affirmation that the DBE firm continues to meet the business size criteria, both the Small Business Administration size criteria that are applicable to the firm's primary NAICS code, and then also the overall gross receipts cap that the DBE program regulations call for. So the SBA regulations are really dependent on the primary NAICS code of your firm. But one of the most popular NAICS codes, which is the general code for highway, street, and bridge construction, has an average annual receipt cap of 39.5 million per year. The DBE program cap is currently 26.29 million in average annual receipts per year. So that's a little bit of an indication of what kind of size caps we're talking about, but it is possible that the Small Business Administration size criteria for your particular firm, depending on your primary NAICS code, might be smaller than the 26.29 million that is mentioned in the DBE regulations. So you'll want to go to the Small Business Administration website and make sure to check those caps on sizes for your primary NAICS code. The second factor in affirming, proving the business size, no change in the size of your business, is that each DBE firm is required to submit their most recent federal tax return to South Dakota DOT each year. Now, depending on where your anniversary date for certification falls, that may wind up being 2 years ago, two tax years ago. For example, right now, if my certification date fell on March 2nd, 2022, which is today, very likely my 2021 tax year federal tax return is not going to be available yet if I haven't submitted it to the IRS yet. So I would have to submit my tax year 2020 federal tax return. The DBE office of the South Dakota DOT does send an official reminder to DBE firms 60 days prior to their annual affidavit paperwork date, and then also generally follows up with calls and emails if there is no response. The South Dakota DOT DBE office is not trying to decertify any DBE, but ultimately the responsibility is on the DBE to submit the annual paperwork. There's no regulatory requirement of reminders and follow-ups, but the DOT does that in an effort to make sure that if you're a business, it's possible this isn't top of mind constantly. We like to try to remind you to get that paperwork in. Ultimately, though, if the annual affidavit of no change is not submitted within about a month after its due date, it's very likely that your DBE firm could face decertification. The South Dakota DOT and Project Solutions, Inc. work together to maintain a website at this link with all DBE certification related forms available, including the annual affidavit forms. If you will click this link and then navigate to the forms page, you'll see annual affidavit forms for both in-state and out-of-state firms, personal net worth forms, and so forth. A reminder that the annual affidavit does need to be notarized and also signed by the DBE firm's owner. Finally, I did just want to note that once a DBE firm is certified, and this is of interest particularly to out-of-state firms, a DBE must cooperate fully with any request for certification related information made by the South Dakota DOT. If you're an out-of-state firm you understand that when you apply to the South Dakota DOT, there is a very narrow scope of information that the DOT can request from you, because the United States DOT doesn't want an out-of-state firm to have to redo the full certification process for each state that it applies to. And so if you're an out-of-state firm, South Dakota, it is mostly reviewing your application for completion and looking for obvious factual errors that may have occurred on the part of your home state. But once a DBE becomes certified in any particular state, it becomes that state's DBE. This is guidance that we've received from the US DOT DBE program manager. And so although you are primarily based out of state, once certified, you are then subject to the same information standards and cooperation standards as in-state firms. Now we'll switch gears and examine some DBE program topics that are related to a DBE firm's participation on a highway construction contract. The first contract-related topic is commercially useful function. And I want to begin by explaining that when a DBE is performing work on a South Dakota DOT project, there are actually two concepts or relationships that are kind of at play on those contracts. The first is just the normal prime contractor subcontractor relationship. There's a subcontract. The DBE subcontractor has been hired to perform certain work activities and receive a certain payment for those activities. Just an ordinary subcontract like any other. But in the DBE program, there's also the concept of counting DBE participation toward the annual overall goal of the South Dakota DOT. And commercially useful function really concerns itself with the counting of DBE participation. What participation, what activities that the DBE performs can be counted fully toward the South Dakota DOT's overall goal. So what this means is that the DOT looks at the way that a DBE is performing its duties on the project site to ensure that it's not running afoul of any of these regulatory issues that might arise in the realm of commercially useful function. And so fundamentally, a DBE is performing a commercially useful function when it's responsible for the execution of the work of the contract, usually it's a subcontract, and is carrying out its responsibilities by actually performing, managing, and supervising the work involved. One question that is commonly asked: is the role of the DBE on the project consistent with normal industry practice? If a DBE firm is supplying materials for a project, even if the firm is also installing the materials, whether or not the firm is doing any work on the project site, in order for the supplying to be a commercially useful function, the DBE has to be responsible for negotiating the price of the materials, determining quality and quantity, ordering the material, and paying for the material itself. There are also additional special rules for trucking contracts and second-tier subcontracts. Now, we're not going to get into the weeds on these two topics in this presentation, but if you are a trucking firm or if you're a DBE firm that regularly engages in second-tier subcontracting. This is a topic that if you contact myself or the South Dakota DBE office, DOT DBE office, we'd be happy to provide you with additional information on this. So because this topic can be a little bit challenging to understand in the theoretical sense, here are some examples of some commonly seen situations that might occur out on the project site that may create commercially useful function issues. So the first is that a prime contractor decides to self-perform work or assist the DBE in performing certain work without the prior approval of the South Dakota DOT in order to keep a project on schedule. You might also see equipment that is used by the DBE is actually owned by the prime contractor or another non-DBE contractor, and there's not a formal lease agreement. And then also, if a DBE works for just one prime contractor or a large portion of the DBE's work is with one single prime contractor, that is a situation that might create a commercially useful function issue. Now, I mentioned just a moment ago about the two concepts or relationships that are kind of at play on a DBE contract. And so to state it plainly here, commercially useful function really has to do with ensuring that only work that can be counted toward the overall DBE participation goal is counted. Monitoring of CUF is to ensure the proper counting of work that has been contractually attributed or committed to DBEs. If some of these CUF issues arise in the field, a DBE firm is not going to lose a contract. They're not going to be kicked off of a project. It doesn't, the counting relationship doesn't ordinarily extend or create issues with the normal sort of prime and subcontractor relationship. So a DBE shouldn't be afraid that if the South Dakota DOT discovers a commercially useful function issue on a project, that they will lose that project or lose that contract. That is exceedingly unlikely to happen. At the South Dakota DOT, project engineers out in the field are responsible for monitoring commercially useful function. They record their observations about which firms were on the project site, which work was being accomplished, and really who was doing what. Here are some examples of performance that is likely to be monitored on the project site. And notice that each of these items is really getting back to the fundamental definition of CUF, the fundamental heart of it, which is the DBE managing its own work on the project? Is it supervising its own work on the project? Is the DBE owner in control of his or her own firm and the work that they're performing? And so some examples of questions that might be monitored or asked on the project site. Is the DBE performing the work items that that firm is under contract to perform? Who is supervising the DBE's work? Is the prime contractor performing any of the DBE's work? Does the equipment used by the DBE have the firm's markings or emblems? If the equipment is owned, if it's leased, are there leasing agreements that are normal industry practice leasing agreements? And then finally, if the DBE is contracted to provide supplies, did the DBE actually deliver those supplies? As I stated a moment ago, CUF issues are generally not going to get a DBE kicked off of a project, so to speak. It's not going to make a DBE lose a contract or lose work items on a contract because there are CUF issues. Again, commercially useful function has more to do with counting DBE participation correctly. However, repeated CUF issues might raise questions to the DBE office about a DBE firm's control and independence, which could then lead to a review of the DBE's certification qualifications. The DBE regulations state that an independent business is one whose viability is not dependent on its relationship with another firm or firms. And so if the DBE office sees issues like a DBE firm that doesn't own its own equipment or doesn't have sort of standard arm's length industry practice lease agreements for equipment, if a DBE doesn't have qualified staff and expertise to carry out work items and is relying, maybe on the prime or on some other contractor for that expertise, if there has been a pattern of the DBE dealing exclusively or even primarily with a single prime, each of these issues might potentially raise questions about a DBE's control of their own firm and independence. And then they would also be commercially useful function issues which might affect the counting of DBE participation. So there is some blending of the two concepts, and a DBE firm should be aware of that. Now I'd like to move on to the topic of termination, substitution, or withdrawal of a DBE from a contract. And there are some basic rules at play here, but first I want to make clear what we mean by termination, substitution, withdrawal. Termination, we're talking about an effort by the prime contractor to terminate the DBE's work on a subcontract, to essentially remove that firm from the project. Substitution can mean a prime contractor's effort to substitute one DBE for another on the project. So it could be removing a DBE from the project or terminating that subcontract and replacing that DBE with a different firm. Or it could also mean a prime contractor's effort to give work that was originally committed to one DBE on the contract to a different one who's already on the contract. And then finally, withdrawal is pretty straightforward. A DBE firm decides for whatever reason that they'd like to relinquish their work on the contract and withdraw. And so the basic rules here are that a prime contractor must receive approval from South Dakota DOT prior to terminating or reducing the work of a DBE on their prime contract. They must also receive prior approval from South Dakota DOT before allowing a DBE to perform work that was originally committed to another DBE, a different DBE, at the time of letting. Now, I do want to make clear that these rules about termination, substitution, these only apply to projects that have a DBE participation goal set on them. So the prime contractor at the time of letting on those types of projects has committed to the use of specific DBEs in specific dollar amounts on that contract. And those are the types of contracts that these rules apply to. If a prime contractor intends, for whatever reason, to terminate a DBE's subcontract, or even just reduce a DBE's work on a project that has a DBE participation commitment, the prime must first provide written notice to the DBE and give the reasoning. In most cases, in my experience, the prime contractor wants to terminate the DBE's subcontract for some disagreement about performance or timeliness. The DBE then has 5 calendar days to provide a response with an objection or some other explanation for the DBE firm's performance. Alternatively, the DBE can also choose to withdraw from the project. In any case, all of this documentation between the prime contractor to the DBE and then from the DBE firm to the prime contractor should also be sent to the South Dakota DOT DBE office. The South Dakota DOT will examine all applicable documentation and will only approve subcontract termination requests or reduction of work requests for good cause. Now, listed below are several factors that are taken directly from the US DOT DBE regulations, which might constitute good cause. Examples are things like the DBE fails to execute a written contract with the prime contractor, the DBE's performance is not consistent with industry standards, the DBE fails to meet reasonable bond requirements, the DBE becomes financially insolvent or credit unworthy, the DBE is found to be ineligible to work on public projects, the DBE is ineligible to receive DBE credit for the work type. What this means is that there is a change in the DBE certification status between the time of the letting and the start of the project. And so maybe the DBE is still a certified DBE in South Dakota, but they've lost the ability to perform for participation credit in a certain work type. The DBE owner dies or becomes disabled and cannot perform, or finally, the DBE voluntarily withdraws from the project. Now, these again are examples which might constitute good cause. Each of these subcontract termination requests or reduction of work requests, in my experience, are very fact dependent. It matters what the particular circumstances of the project and of the request are. And these are the factors that are weighed when the DOT examines one of these requests, but no single item here is definitely dispositive when it comes to approving termination requests or reduction of work requests. It's really a balance, and the facts of the circumstance and professional judgment come into play. Now, once a DBE withdraws from a project or a termination or reduction request has been approved, that's not the end of it. The DBE regulations require that the prime contractor make a good faith effort to find a replacement or a substitution DBE to carry out the committed work in the prime contract. The prime contractor may not self-perform the work or use a non-DBE subcontractor to perform that work until the good faith effort requirement has been reviewed and approved by South Dakota DOT. Good faith effort is exactly what it sounds like. Did the prime contractor make a genuine effort in good faith to seek out a substitute DBE to perform the rest of the committed work on their prime contract? The committed work being that amount that at the time of letting, the prime contractor committed to use DBE firms for. Examples of good faith efforts include: did the prime use the South Dakota DOT DBE directory to identify potential substitute DBEs? Did the prime make a reasonable documented effort to contact potential substitute DBEs? Did the prime contractor review the project for other work that a DBE might perform in order to attain the committed DBE participation amount? And then finally, did the prime contractor not reject a DBE without substantiated or documented good cause? An example of this that I've seen is that a prime contractor and a particular DBE subcontractor had a documented, sort of well-known negative work history. And even though that DBE firm might have been available as a substitution on a prime contract, the prime contractor chose not to work with that particular firm. I'd like to move on now to the topic of prompt payment. And this is a topic without a ton of depth, but it is an important topic for DBE firms and other subcontractors to be aware of. Prime contractors must pay their subcontractors, including DBE subs, within 15 days of receiving payment for work that has been accepted by the South Dakota DOT. Also, retainage must be returned to subs, including DBEs, within 15 days of the work having been satisfactorily completed. And what that means is that all subcontracted tasks have been completed and paid for and properly documented. If a prime contractor withholds payment beyond these timelines, the South Dakota DOT may request justification from the prime, which would describe the good cause that the prime has for the withholding. Ordinarily, in South Dakota, prompt payment matters can be resolved informally by contacting the area office. But if the matter persists, the South Dakota DOT has advised some subcontractors to file a lien against the prime contractor. If a DBE subcontractor believes that payment has been unjustly withheld from them past the 15-day timeline, the DBE should contact either the South Dakota DOT DBE office or the area office in which the work is located to file a prompt payment complaint. Prompt payment is a federal requirement found in the US DOT DBE regulations. The regulation also prohibits intimidation and retaliation because a DBE complains about a right or a privilege guaranteed to them under the regulation. So if you're a DBE sub and you believe that your payment has been unjustly withheld past the 15-day prompt payment timeline, you should not hesitate to contact the South Dakota DOT to file a prompt payment complaint. Finally, I'd like to take just a couple of slides to talk about South Dakota DOT's DBE supportive services. The South Dakota DOT, like most other states, utilizes federal DBE supportive services funding to offer a variety of business development resources to certified DBEs. These resources, again, are federally funded, and so they are free to use or to participate in for DBE firms. One of the ways that the South Dakota DOT uses its DBE supportive services funds is to produce training videos on business and skills development topics. Project Solutions, Inc. has developed a number of videos which can be found at this link. Topics include plans reading, project scheduling, developing prime contractor and subcontractor relationships, management and leadership, and business development strategies, as well as several other topics. In addition, the South Dakota DOT also uses DBE Supportive Services funds to offer enrollment to DBEs in the South Dakota DOT's DBE Business Development Program, which is a little more intensive one-on-one training and support for DBEs in business and skill development. The South Dakota DOT also offers DBE and prime contractor marketing and networking events, and then also informational presentations and webinars such as this one. In March of 2022, there are a couple of upcoming webinars that Project Solutions Inc. has created for the South Dakota DOT DBE Supportive Services Program. On March 10th, 2022 at 10 a.m. Mountain Time, there'll be a webinar on social media presence, carving your space in the metaverse. Learn about the business tools that can help you advertise using social media. On March 30th, 2022, again at 10 a.m. Mountain Time, there'll be a webinar on free marketing tools, the best free tools to reach more people. Learn how to market yourself as a DBE and how to use available search engine tools, creative marketing tools, and social media platforms. I hope this presentation has been informational. If you have any follow-up questions on anything that was presented here, please don't hesitate to contact either myself or the DBE Program Coordinator for the South Dakota DOT. Both of our contact information is listed on this final slide. Thank you.